Hi everyone, my name is Carlyle Cortes and welcome to my video. Today, we will be talking about mathematics in nature. Now, Carlyle, what do you mean there is mathematics in nature? Well, if you understand it in a fundamental level, you can see that almost everything around us is involved with numbers, such as the time, the amount of fingers you have in your hands, and even the amount of cells that is inside your body. It can be millions upon billions of cells in there. Now, that's not exactly what I am trying to talk about here. What I am trying to talk about is the patterns that you can see in everyday life. Now, these are symmetry, fractals, spiral, and tessellation. Now, Carlyle, what is a symmetry?
Well, symmetry means that one shape is identical to the other shape when it is moved, rotated, or flipped, or can even be described as showing a mirror image of itself. There are two types of symmetry. One is radial symmetry, where it has the condition of having similar parts regularly arranged around a central axis. The second is a bilateral symmetry, where it has the condition of having two parts of itself be the duplicate of the other if cut in half.
Again, Carlyle, what is a fractal?
A fractal is a pattern where the shape is repeated in progressively smaller sizes and in different angles.
I don't quite understand what a spiral is.
A spiral is a pattern where it starts at a central point and moves around itself in a circle and continues widening.
Can you please explain tessellation to me?
Tessellation is a pattern where objects are closely fitted to each other with no gaps in between. This umbrella is an example of a radial symmetry where, as you can see, that there is a center point and it branches out into several different areas in equal parts. This fan is another example of radial symmetry. As you can see that this is the center point and it branches out into several different areas equally, as you can see here. This lid here is another example of radial symmetry. As you can see here, there is the midpoint here, and it creates equidistant areas that are similar to each other. As you can see here, this painting I made is an example of a bilateral symmetry. If you cut this halfway, you can see that both these two areas are equal. This butterfly project that I have made is an example of bilateral symmetry, where if you cut this in half, yes, you can see that these figures are exactly the same. This tree here is an example of a fractal. As you can see here that there are many shapes that branch out to create smaller shapes just like it. This cactus plant here is another example of a fractal where there is a shape that comes and branches out just like it. Except for that one really long strand here. Hi, Dippy! This tree, as we can see here, is another example of a fractal where there are shapes that branch out into smaller shapes from one area. That bush over there is an example of a fractal where, as you can see, it starts from a point over there and it builds up and creates smaller pieces of it. This tiny little bush here is an example of a fractal. Another fractal wherein, as you can see, that there is small parts over here and it branches out creating smaller parts that is similar to itself. This stuffed toy of RJ over here is an example of a spiral. As you can see here, it starts off at a center point and it continues on to create a spiral. This coiled up belt is an example of a spiral where you can see this midline here that curves and it keeps on widening and widening. This hat is an example of a spiral. As you can see here, there's a midpoint that curves and it keeps on widening and widening.
A really good example that you can find in the human body is the ear. It is an example of a spiral where it comes from the center and it circles out.
Heart is an example of a spiral, wherein as you can see that it starts from a midpoint and it curves and then it goes in circles. This egg carton is an example of tessellation, where there are figures that are closely linked together to create this pattern. My floor is an example of tessellation, where there are figures that are closely linked together with no gaps in between. Another example of tessellation, as you can see here, if you look really closely in this stitch, you can see several different figures that are closely linked together with no gaps in between. It can be especially seen here in the stitched area. This sidewalk over here is an example of a tessellation where the bricks are laid together so that they are close to each other with no gaps. The roof over there is another example of tessellation, wherein the tiles over there is grouped together so that it creates no gaps.
Now that you know about patterns in nature, I hope this makes you more aware about the beauty in mathematics in our modern world. Thank you for watching my video, and I hope you all well.